It is 4 in the afternoon in a remote farming town in southern Brazil. You walk down a dusty dirt road, the humidity is just oppressive, and suddenly you realize you are seeing double. Identical blonde, blue-eyed children everywhere, an entire town mirroring itself, and the man rumored to have created them, the most notorious sadistic doctor from the Auschwitz concentration camp.
You absolutely have to stick around until the end of this case to hear the unbelievable resolution, because the truth hiding in their DNA is wilder than any conspiracy.
We are Mike and Abby, and welcome to Wild Crime Podcasts. We are officially done with boring, slow-burn true crime. We're tearing into the most baffling cases on Earth, untangling the lies, and dropping you right in the middle of the madness.
Whether you were on a long drive, crushing a workout, or just feeling a little bored, we're here to walk you through the mystery and make your next hour incredibly thrilling.
And man, we are dropping right into a place that actively, literally defies biological logic today.
Yeah, it really does.
I want you to really visualize the setting here. We are in a remote farming municipality in the southernmost state of Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul.
Right.
The town is called Cândido Godói, but specifically we are zooming in on a tiny, hyper-isolated district within it called Linha São Pedro.
And look, when we say isolated, we do not mean like a quiet suburb.
No, not at all.
For most of its history, this place was completely cut off from modern infrastructure. We're talking about a community reachable only by these awful mud-choked tracks carved through the rural landscape.
Exactly.
It has a tiny population of roughly 6,700 people.
And it was founded by a very small, tightly knit group of German immigrants. I mean, the cultural isolation is so extreme that even today, many of the residents do not primarily speak Portuguese.
Wait, really? In Brazil?
Yeah, they speak an archaic German dialect called Rio Grandenser Hunsrückisch.
Wow.
It is basically a linguistic time capsule from the 19th century. And, if you walk through this town, the visual reality hits you immediately. It genuinely feels like a glitch in the Matrix.
Because the twinning rate in Cândido Godói is 10%.
Which sounds high, but I need you to put that into a global perspective for us. Like, what is the standard baseline?
The baseline shatters that number entirely. The global average for twin births is somewhere around 1%.
1%.
Yeah, maybe it creeps up slightly higher in a few very specific geographic pockets around the world, but 10%. That is a 1,000% increase over the global average.
That's just insane.
It is. Standard biological distributions simply do not behave like that naturally. Without some kind of massive systemic catalyst, those numbers are just straight up impossible.
And it gets even more concentrated. If you zoom in on just that specific hotspot, Linha São Pedro, there are 43 twin pairs packed into a tiny 4-kilometer radius.
My God.
That is 43 sets of twins living basically on top of each other.
I struggle to even comprehend the math on that. Because standard human populations not only have a low rate of twins overall, but the type of twins is highly regulated by biology. Monozygotic twins, identical twins, usually make up only about 30% of all twin births.
Okay.
The vast majority of twins born naturally are dizygotic, or fraternal. They share, as much DNA as standard siblings. Are you telling me this town breaks the monozygotic ratio too?
Oh, they completely destroy it. In this specific settlement, the monozygotic twin rate is 42%.
Are you serious?
Nearly half of the twins born there are identical duplicates. They share the exact same genetic blueprint. It completely defies every established medical model of human reproduction.
If you're watching on YouTube right now, drop a comment. What would your reaction be if you moved to a rural town and suddenly half the families around you started having identical twins?
I would lose my mind.
Same. Because my immediate instinct would be to test the groundwater, refuse to eat the local food, and then pack my bags.
Seriously?
There is a primal visceral fear associated with biological replication on that scale. It genuinely feels unnatural.
Those numbers are completely unhinged. But they pale in comparison to the twisted theory that eventually surfaced about who was supposedly responsible for engineering it.
Right. Because when biology fails to provide a quick, comforting answer, human nature demands a villain. And the world found the absolute worst one imaginable.
Enter the prime suspect in the town's darkest piece of lore, Josef Mengele, the Angel of Death.
Man, just hearing that name attached to a spike in identical twins sends a complete chill down your spine.
It really does. And for anyone who needs the grim historical context, Mengele was the SS physician at the Auschwitz concentration camp.
He was the man standing on the selection ramps when the trains arrived.
Yeah.
He would literally decide with a flick of his wrist who would be sent immediately to the gas chambers
Yeah.
and who would be kept alive to serve as test subjects for his horrific medical experiments.
Just absolute evil.
Pure evil, and his obsession was twins. He tortured thousands of children in a pathetic, pseudoscientific pursuit of engineering a master race for the Third Reich. He believed he could find the genetic key to mass-producing Aryan children.
And we have to be brutally clear about his legacy before we move forward. What he was doing in those barracks was not science.
Not at all.
It was sadistic, unrestrained torture dressed up in a white lab coat. His so-called experiments yielded absolutely zero scientific value for the medical community.
None.
He was a monster operating with unchecked authority and unlimited cruelty.
Exactly. And after the war ended and the Allies liberated the camps, Mengele managed to slip through the chaos.
Of course he did.
He utilized the infamous rat lines, the underground escape routes for Nazi war criminals, often facilitated by, sympathetic networks, and he fled to South America. He arrived in Argentina in 1949,
Okay.
and he lived there relatively openly for an entire decade. But in 1960, the Israeli intelligence agency, Mossad, captured Adolf Eichmann on the streets of Buenos Aires.
Oh, wow. That must have terrified him.
That capture sent absolute shockwaves through the Nazi fugitive network. Mengele panicked. He knew he was next on the list. So he fled Argentina, moved to Paraguay briefly, and finally vanished into the vast, unregulated interior of Brazil.
Which is exactly the evasion that birthed the Camarasa theory.
Right.
So an Argentine historian named Jorge Camarasa published this absolute bombshell book claiming that Mengele didn't just hide in Brazil, he allegedly continued his work. Camarasa theorized that in the early 1960s, Mengele disguised himself as a roaming veterinarian and physician. He claimed Mengele traveled through the dirt roads of Cândido Godói, dispensing mysterious potions, hormones, or drugs to pregnant women to explicitly induce twin births.
The sheer audacity of that claim is staggering.
I know.
The idea that the most wanted war criminal on the planet was running a mobile fertility clinic in the Brazilian jungle, it sounds like total fiction.
It does sound like fiction, but the locals provided incredibly compelling testimonies that kept the myth alive for decades.
Oh, what do they say?
The farmers remembered a foreign doctor arriving in their town, a man who wore pristine white gloves, which, by the way, is an incredibly strange, sterile choice for a rural farm vet tramping through the mud in the 1960s.
Yeah, that is a massive red flag.
Right. And they reported that he was obsessively checking the pulses of pregnant women. He also took a bizarre, intense interest in breeding twin animals, showing farmers specific techniques to manipulate the reproduction of their livestock.
And his alias, what name did he use?
He reportedly introduced himself to the townspeople as Rudolf Weiss.
Weiss, which translates directly to white in German.
Yep.
A sickening nod to the infamous white medical coat he wore on the train platforms at Auschwitz. The sheer arrogance of choosing that name is infuriating.
The locals absolutely swore it was him. Years later, when historians and journalists showed these rural farmers a photograph of Josef Mengele, the reaction was visceral.
I bet.
They didn't hesitate. They pointed at the photo and said, "That's him. That's the doctor who treated us."
Wait, I have to stop you because the logic here is full of holes.
How so?
What was going through the minds of these townspeople? Why would a tight-knit, deeply isolated farming community completely trust a random foreign doctor who shows up out of nowhere dispensing mysterious liquids to their pregnant wives?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, insular communities are notoriously skeptical of outsiders.
That's a fair point, but you have to put yourself in their environment at the time.
Okay.
This is the 1960s in the rural Brazilian outback. There were absolutely no hospitals nearby. There were no local pharmacies.
Right, they had nothing.
If a well-dressed man shows up with a medical bag, claiming he has the expertise to treat your sick cattle and ensure a safe, healthy pregnancy for your wife in a place where infant mortality is a very real, constant threat, you listen to him. They were just desperate for any access to modern medicine.
I get that. But even granting that desperation, the logistics of Camarasa's theory are maddening.
Yeah.
How does a fugitive on the run, who is supposedly terrified of being snatched off the street by Mossad agents, haul sophisticated medical equipment and experimental genetic hormones across unpaved, mud-choked roads undetected?
That doesn't make a lot of sense.
You cannot just whip up twin-inducing serums in a barn. That level of endocrinology requires refrigeration, centrifuges, completely sterile laboratory environments. The idea of a fully functioning mobile genetics lab in the jungle is pure cinematic garbage.
The idea of a fugitive running a jungle laboratory definitely sounds like a bad movie. But before we look at the genetics that disprove it, You have to understand the absolute madness of his mental state while on the run.
Yes. We really need to pause the timeline right here and dissect exactly what was going on in this man's head. Because Mengele's behavior while in hiding is a textbook case study in pathetic narcissism.
Completely pathetic. You would assume the most hunted war criminal on Earth would adopt a quiet, invisible, subservient life.
Right. Change your face, keep your head down.
He should have kept his head down and vanished. But Mengele's hubris was his fatal flaw. His ego simply would not allow him to just be a normal, forgotten person. He was deeply, pathologically fixated on his own identity as a superior scientist and a man of authority.
He was a coward who couldn't let go of the power he held when he was protected by an entire army. Look at the specific behavioral quirks reported by the people who interacted with him in Brazil.
They're so weird.
Witnesses stated that while he was conducting these supposed medical tests, or even just doing routine farm work, he would loudly whistle classical music, specifically the operas of Richard Wagner.
That is one of the most chilling details of his entire profile.
Mm.
Survivors of Auschwitz specifically documented that Mengele would whistle operatic tunes, often Wagner, while making life-or-death selections on the platforms.
God.
It was his signature. He was carrying that exact same psychological dominance ritual into a dirt floor farmhouse in Brazil. He couldn't drop the act.
And his grotesque obsessions didn't change either. While hiding in South America, he was reportedly still fixated on heterochromia, the condition where a person has two different colored eyes.
Oh, I hate this part.
He continued collecting iris data from South American subjects.
Yeah.
This directly mirrors the morbid, sickening collection of human eyes he kept pinned to the walls of his laboratory during the Holocaust. It's just vile.
He also continued making plaster casts of people's teeth and jaws.
Which proves how completely delusional he was. He was attempting to continue a horrific legacy in a vacuum. But here is where the paranoia clashes with the narcissism.
Yeah, tell me about the teeth.
He was absolutely terrified of being caught. He was so paranoid about being identified through dental records that he actively refused to seek modern medical care for himself. He suffered from severe, rotting dental abscesses.
Ouch.
And instead of going to a dentist, he treated them himself by slicing his own gums open with a rusty razor blade.
It is the perfect metaphor for his entire existence. He is like a washed-up, pathetic actor who refuses to take off his costume after the theater has shut down.
Wow, yes, exactly.
He's living in squalor, treating himself with a razor blade like an animal, but his towering, fragile ego won't let him admit he is a complete failure. He had to keep playing the role of the angel of death because without that title, he was just a miserable, hunted man hiding in the mud. His ego was massive, but it does not explain how he actually managed to stay free for decades. We will get to his pathetic demise in a second, but first, you have to hear about the catastrophic institutional failures that kept him hidden.
This is the part of the investigation that genuinely makes my blood boil.
Oh, I am right there with you.
The fact that this man was able to live out his natural life without ever facing a tribunal is an absolute indictment of the global intelligence community at the time.
The sheer incompetence, the bureaucracy, and the complete apathy of global institutions in the decades following the war is staggering. Let's start with the Israeli Mossad.
Okay.
They had a dedicated team tracking him. Zvi Ahroni, one of the elite agents who physically captured Eichmann, was actively hunting Mengele in Brazil. They had him located. They tracked him to a rural farm area near São Paulo.
They had him.
They had him. But in 1962, the head of Mossad, Isser Harel, officially called off the manhunt.
Wait, they called it off? The man responsible for the torture of thousands of children, and they just stood down when they had him in their sights.
Yes. They cited budgetary constraints.
You've got to be kidding me.
I wish I was. They claimed the agency needed to shift its financial and operational priorities toward the escalating geopolitical conflict with Egypt. They literally dropped the ball when they were standing on the 1-yard line. They chose to walk away.
And West Germany is just as culpable in this failure.
Absolutely.
Mengele's family ran a highly successful, wealthy farm tool manufacturing company back in his hometown of Günzburg, Karl Mengele and Sons. The West German government completely failed to monitor the finances of this company.
How is that even possible?
Gross negligence. Because of their negligence, the Mengele family was able to safely funnel cash to him in South America for decades. He was being financially supported by a legitimate European corporation while the free world was supposedly hunting him.
Then you have Paraguay. Under the dictatorship of Alfredo Stroessner, Paraguay actively shielded him. They didn't just look the other way. They granted him full legal citizenship in 1959. They gave him a passport under the name Josef Mengele. They handed him a sovereign shield.
But the most infuriating, systematic cover-up happened in Brazil. When the heat from the press and intelligence agencies got too high, Mengele stole the identity of a real, living Austrian man named Wolfgang Gerhard.
Right.
Gerhard was a Nazi sympathizer who eventually moved back to Europe, but before he left, he handed his official Brazilian identity card over to Mengele.
Just gave it to him.
Yeah. Mengele literally pasted his own photograph right over Gerhard's face on the ID. And when the real Gerhard died in Austria years later, Mengele actually sent money to pay for his headstone to maintain the illusion that Wolfgang Gerhard was dead. All while Mengele continued living under his name in the suburbs of São Paulo.
He was protected in plain sight by a dedicated network of extreme Nazi sympathizers. The Bossert family and the Stammer family. They housed him, they fed him, they managed his finances, and they kept his secret for almost 20 years.
Think about the infuriating irony here. The world's most wanted man, the architect of unspeakable genetic horrors, was living a mundane, rigid, military-style routine in a tiny bungalow in a massive South American city.
Yeah.
He was walking the streets, completely evading the combined justice systems of the entire world. It is a total breakdown of international law and morality.
If you are watching on YouTube right now, hit the comments. Who carries the most blame for this sheer failure? The governments who turned a blind eye due to budgets and politics, or the secret network of everyday sympathizers who funded and hid him?
It is a profound failure on every single level.
He lived as a ghost for almost 20 years, but his luck finally ran out on a random afternoon in 1979.
And it wasn't a tactical strike team crashing through his windows or a dramatic courtroom reckoning that took him down. His end was violently mundane.
Very anticlimactic. On February 7th, 1979, Mengele was visiting his protectors, the Bosserts, at a coastal resort town in Bertioga, Brazil. It was just a normal day. He waded into the ocean for a swim. While out in the water, he suffered a massive stroke. He collapsed in the waves and drowned. The man who orchestrated the systematic murder of hundreds of thousands of lives died choking on seawater on a random Wednesday afternoon.
And even in death, the network protected him. The Bossert family pulled his body from the water, but they didn't alert the press.
No, they didn't.
They didn't notify the authorities of his true identity. They quietly buried him in a cemetery in the town of Embu das Artes under his stolen name, Wolfgang Gerhard. They kept the death of the world's most wanted Nazi a complete secret for 6 entire years.
It wasn't until 1985 that the lie finally unraveled. The West German police finally decided to execute a raid on the home of Hans Sedlmayr, a lifelong friend of Mengele's who lived back in Ginsburg.
Right.
During the raid, police found a coded address book and a cache of hidden letters. One of those letters was written by Wolfram Bossert, notifying the Mengele family in Germany that Josef was dead.
The German authorities immediately alerted the Brazilian police. They hauled the Bosserts in for interrogation. Under intense pressure, they finally cracked.
Took long enough.
Seriously. They confessed the whole timeline and gave up the exact location of the grave in Embu das Artes.
Which triggers one of the most fascinating forensic exhumations of the 20th century. On June 6, 1985, authorities dug up the grave. But finding a skeleton in a box doesn't mean anything until you can definitively prove who is in the dirt.
Right.
And remember, in 1985, DNA testing was not yet a standard forensic tool.
Exactly. They had to rely on craniometry. They brought in an incredibly skilled forensic dentist, an American named Stephen F. Daci, to lead the pathology work alongside Brazilian experts.
What exactly is craniometry?
It involves meticulously measuring the angles, curvatures, and bone structures of the skull, and superimposing those measurements over known, verified photographs of the suspect.
But the absolute smoking gun that identified him was entirely visceral, and it ties directly back to that pathetic paranoia we talked about earlier.
Oh, the teeth. Yes. Dr. Daci and the pathology team were examining the skull when they found a very specific, unnatural abnormality. There was a distinct hole worn through the left cheekbone, specifically the maxillary sinus.
And that hole wasn't caused by a bullet or trauma. It was a result of a chronic, untreated, long-term infection.
Exactly.
It was the exact bone deterioration caused by the severe dental abscesses Mengele had repeatedly sliced open with that rusty razor blade. Because he was too terrified to visit a real dentist and risk exposure, his own paranoid back alley surgery left a permanent, identifiable physical stamp right on his skeleton.
It is incredible. In 1992, the emergence of advanced DNA testing officially confirmed what Dr. Daci already knew. The bones belonged to Josef Mengele.
Case closed.
But here's the most darkly poetic piece of this entire saga. When the confirmation was made, the Mengele family in Germany formally refused to repatriate his remains. They didn't want him.
So today, the skeleton of the Angel of Death does not rest in a grave. The bones sit inside a blue plastic bag at the São Paulo Institute for Forensic Medicine. Wow.
The man who obsessively treated living human bodies as disposable medical specimens is now a literal medical specimen himself. His bones are currently used as teaching tools for Brazilian medical students learning forensic pathology.
That is the ultimate demotion. So they found the monster's bones and closed the global manhunt. But what about the twins of Cândido Godói? When scientists finally looked at the town's baptism records, they found a paradox that shattered the entire conspiracy.
This is where we separate the terrifying folklore from the hard mathematical truth. Because a myth is just a ghost story until you stress test it with actual data.
And the data they used to test this was monumental. Researchers didn't just look at a few years of birth certificates. They executed a massive, comprehensive survey of 6,262 Catholic baptism records in Cândido Godói, spanning decades of the town's history.
Let's run a basic logical stress test on the Camarasa theory. If Mengele was actively roaming the dirt roads of this town between 1964 and 1968, handing out experimental twin-inducing drugs to pregnant women, what exactly should the historical data show?
A spike.
Right, it should show a massive, undeniable statistical spike in twin births strictly localized to those 4 years.
Exactly. You would see a flat line, a massive mountain during his tenure, and then a drop. But when the geneticists and historians crunched the numbers on those 6,000 records,
What did they find?
the reveal was staggering. There was absolutely zero spike during the mid-60s. The twinning rate during the years Mengele was supposedly active was identical to the years before it.
So it had nothing to do with it.
Nothing. It gets even worse for the conspiracy theorists. The timeline anomaly completely dismantles the myth from the foundation. The researchers kept going backward. They opened up the oldest, most fragile baptism registries from 1927.
1927. Decades before Mengele ever set foot in South America. Decades before the outbreak of the Second World War.
Right. And in those 1927 records, written in faded church ink, they found that 17 sets of twins were already born among the original founding families of Linha San Pedro.
Wow.
The biological anomaly was already thriving in the community before the Nazi Party even took power in Germany.
And to put the absolute final nail in the coffin, the twinning rate didn't drop off after Mengele suffered his stroke and drowned in 1979.
Exactly.
If his secret lab was responsible, the rate should have plummeted the moment his heart stopped. But the rate remained completely constant into the 1980s, 90s, and beyond. This proves undeniably that the cause is a permanent physiological reality of the town, not a temporary artificial intervention.
I have to challenge this, though. If the math completely disproves it and the timeline makes it physically impossible, why did this rumor survive with such ferocity for 40 years?
It's a good question.
Why did the actual locals look at a photo and insist it was him? Are you telling me an entire town was just lying?
I don't think they were maliciously lying. I think human memory is incredibly malleable, especially when influenced by a perfect storm of coincidence, geography, and psychological desperation.
Makes sense.
You have a town founded by German immigrants, speaking an archaic German dialect, located in a region historically known to harbor fugitive Nazis. Then you have a genuine, inexplicable biological mystery happening to their own bodies.
Yeah.
When a slick historian shows up, flashes a photo of a famous Nazi doctor, and connects their local mystery to global history, it provides an answer. Even a horrifying answer is sometimes easier for a community to swallow than a terrifying, invisible unknown.
We will get to why our brains prefer a monster to reality in a minute, but first we need to talk about what the terrifying, invisible unknown actually is.
Okay, let's hear it.
If it wasn't a mad scientist, what is actually causing this town to produce twins at a rate that breaks the laws of probability?
Welcome to the genetic hellscape of the founder effect. This is where the real science is infinitely more terrifying than the conspiracy theory.
Let's lay out the science, and let's make it crystal clear. Cândido Godói, and specifically the Linha San Pedro district, was settled by a very small, deeply isolated group of German immigrants.
Right.
Many of these original families originated from the Hunsrück region of Germany. Historically, that specific region in Germany already had a slightly higher than average twinning rate to begin with.
And this is the core mechanism of the founder effect. When a tiny group of people breaks off from a larger diverse population and completely isolates themselves, like moving to a remote Brazilian jungle, they create a genetic bottleneck.
Okay.
Any rare genetic traits carried by those few founders do not get diluted by outside genetics. Instead, because they only marry and reproduce within their own small group, those rare traits become magnified and hyperconcentrated in the new population over generations.
To measure how concentrated a population has become, geneticists use something called the inbreeding coefficient, or the F value.
Right, and to be clear, when geneticists say inbreeding in this context, they aren't necessarily talking about immediate family members.
No.
They are talking about a closed loop of genetics over a century. The F value calculates how genetically related a population is overall.
And the numbers researchers found in this town are wild. The F value for mothers of singletons, women in the town who only have one baby at a time, is 0.0081.
Okay.
But the F value for the mothers of twins in the town is 0.0148.
Wait, I need to interrupt here. 0.0148 sounds like a microscopic, irrelevant decimal. What does that number actually translate to in plain English? How related are these people?
It is a massive statistical jump. It essentially means that the women having twins are highly genetically related to each other compared to the rest of the town. They are all drawing from the exact same concentrated genetic pool.
Got it.
They are passing down a very specific recessive genetic mutation in a closed loop.
And scientists didn't just theorize this. They actually found the specific mutation. They took DNA samples from the townspeople and sequenced them. What they found is a biological anomaly in something called the TP53 gene.
This is the critical mechanism. I've seen P53 mentioned in oncology and cancer research before. Why is a gene associated with cancer dictating whether someone has twins?
That is the terrifying overlap. TP53 is widely known in the medical community as the guardian of the genome.
That sounds intense.
It is. Normally, its primary job is to act like a cellular bouncer. It constantly scans your cells for DNA damage or errors in cell division. If it finds a heavily damaged cell or a cell that is replicating incorrectly, it triggers a process called apoptosis.
Apoptosis is programmed cell death.
Exactly. It forces the bad cell to commit suicide before it can multiply and turn into a tumor. In the context of reproduction, if an embryo has severe genetic abnormalities, or if the uterus is stressed by multiple embryos that it cannot physically support, the P53 protein triggers apoptosis and terminates the faulty pregnancy. It is the body's natural quality control. Usually, low levels of the P53 protein lead directly to severe infertility or repeated miscarriages.
But in the mothers of Cândido Godói, researchers found a specific mutation within that gene, the P72 allele. In this isolated population, this mutated allele has completely flipped its function.
Wait, how?
It does not cause infertility. Instead, it acts as an anti-apoptotic shield. It activates after an embryo implants in the uterus.
This is where human biology gets hacked. Human bodies are generally not designed to carry multiple embryos simultaneously.
Yeah.
It's a massive physical stressor.
Right.
Most double pregnancies naturally miscarry very early on through apoptosis because the body recognizes the physical strain and terminates it. But the P72 allele in these women acts like a blindfold.
The blindfold, yeah.
It suppresses that natural cell death mechanism. It allows these double pregnancies, which normally would have self-terminated, to survive to full term. It is a literal biological override switch.
And it isn't acting alone. Researchers also found an anomaly in the MDM4 gene, specifically the T allele. The presence of this allele in the mothers has a staggering odds ratio of 3.10 for twinning.
3.10, that is huge.
The combination of these mutated genes trapped in a genetic bottleneck for 100 years created a perfect storm of super-fertility in this tiny geographical pocket.
But here's the brutal, dark trade-off of biology. Nature never gives you something for nothing. Superfertility comes at a terrifying cost.
Yeah, it does.
Because TP53 is the primary gene responsible for killing damaged, dangerous cells, mutating it to suppress cell death has catastrophic side effects for the rest of the body.
The exact same anti-apoptotic shield that allows two embryos to survive the womb also allows mutated cancerous cells to survive in the body.
It's devastating.
The genetic research showed a devastating reality. Mothers of twins in Cândido Godói have 3 times more cases of cancer in their first-degree relatives than mothers of singletons.
300% more cancer. Because the exact same genetic mechanism that is blessing them with identical twins is actively blinding their immune systems to the unchecked growth of tumors. It is a brutal biological double-edged sword.
If you are watching on YouTube right now, jump into the comments for this one. Would you accept a genetic trait that guaranteed you identical twins if it meant a 300% increase in cancer risk for your entire bloodline?
It is a horrifying hypothetical to consider, but it is the physiological reality that this town wakes up to every single day.
Which brings us back to the psychological breakdown of the Mengele myth. We need to pause and examine why the entire world, the media, and the town itself were so eager to believe that a Nazi war criminal was responsible for this anomaly.
It is the second psychological breakdown we need to do today, focusing on the legacy of the criminal and how society processes the inexplicable.
Why did we want to believe Mengele did it? Because it assigns a tangible, punchable villain to a terrifying natural phenomenon.
Yeah.
The genetic truth that invisible, microscopic mutations passed down by your ancestors are dictating your fertility and simultaneously giving your family cancer is existentially terrifying. You cannot fight a gene. You cannot put a mutation on trial.
But you can hate a Nazi. It is infinitely easier for the human brain to blame a boogeyman in a white coat, dispensing evil potions in the night, than to accept the cold, random, and deeply frightening reality of genetic bottlenecks.
Right.
We want a narrative with a bad guy, rather than a reality ruled by uncaring biology.
We have to actively tear down Mengele's legacy right here. The persistent, sensationalized myth that he somehow successfully engineered a town of blonde Aryan twins gives him a dark victory that he absolutely does not deserve.
He deserves nothing.
It validates his sick delusion that he was a scientific visionary who could manipulate human life.
And that is a dangerous, insulting lie. We have to emphasize this point heavily.
Right.
His experiments at Auschwitz were scientifically useless. They produced zero medical breakthroughs. They were nothing more than the sadistic torture of children perpetrated by a man with too much power and zero morality. He achieved absolutely nothing in Brazil. He did not engineer a master race. He did not alter the human genome.
He died a paranoid, pathetic fraud who was treating his own rotting teeth with a razor blade because he was terrified of his own shadow.
Giving him credit for the twins of Cândido Godói is exactly like crediting a bank robber with building the bank vault, just because he happened to be standing outside of it.
That is a perfect way to put it.
The twins existed long before he arrived, and they continued long after he choked on seawater. He was a parasite, feeding off the town's pre-existing anomaly to fuel his own sick fantasies. He was not a pioneer.
The baptism records of 1927 prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the twins of the Brazilian outback belonged to nature, not to a Nazi. But it leaves us with a deeply chilling final reality.
What is that?
If a random genetic bottleneck in a tiny, mud-soaked farming town can radically alter human reproduction and skyrocket cancer rates, what other dormant supergenes are hiding in isolated communities across the globe, just waiting for the right founder effect to wake them up?
That is the real mystery hiding in our DNA.
All right, if we made your drive, your workout, or your downtime even a little bit better today, do us a massive favor. Whether you are watching on YouTube, streaming on Spotify, listening on Apple Podcasts, or literally anywhere else, hit that follow or subscribe button right now. We drop episodes like this frequently, bringing you the most fascinating cases in the most interesting way possible. Lock in, because you do not want to miss the crazy mysteries we have queued up for next time. See you then.